for seeking this office. How you define your role in this as an elected leader and what experiences have prepared you for this role. Thank you. The second opening statement will be from Mark Koran.
Thank you. As stated, I'm Mark Koran. I'm a Republican candidate for state senate here in District 32. And I was born and raised in St. Paul. Actually, we'll start out. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Cindy, and 3 boys. I've been married for 33 years, and that's actually to the same person. But born and raised in St. Paul, and spent and raised our kids there as well. And then we moved up to Lent Township here, just down the road, about 3 miles, in 2007. And what makes me qualified, I believe, for this particular opportunity is that my entire career and life experience really sets me apart, I think, in being able to address the challenges that we have in St. Paul and those things that affect us in life and our policies and level of taxation. Is that I've worked for the Minnesota Department of Revenue for just under 18 years. It really provided a priceless experience in understanding what government is as a business model, and its flaws and its function, and it as in its performance or lack of performance. I'm a huge private sector guy. At the same time, I also maintain a job in the private sector, so understanding what it's like to own my own business, be an employee, add enough value on a weekly basis to earn a paycheck. I had that experience and have been in the private sector since day one when I was 17 in my first job. So with that experience and having my eyes wide open, I've moved to everywhere I've been. I've been very active. I've been a community activist. I've always been about transparency in government and making sure our government officials know who they work for, and even if we have to teach them their job. But I'm dedicated to this community, and I think long before I ever ran, I said, anybody who knows me, is that I think you should have to live in the environment before you legislate for it. I've been born and raised in one of the poor parts of St. Paul, and then also spending a significant part of the community, our time in the community here, gives me a great perspective in our needs holistically as a state, especially in our community. Thank you.
Now we're going to go into questions and answers here. The first question, you'll get the candidates who have 1 minute for their response. Let's see, and let's just begin with Paul and work our way down. What specific economic policies would you support to create and retain jobs that pay well and keep the economy strong in our district? Thank you. And now to Mark Koran.
Some of the key things that affect our area, and I think are the level of taxation and the regulatory burden that are placed on all of our businesses that place us at a disadvantage from a community perspective. I'm also a firm believer in creating a workforce that can provide for all the employers that they seek or make it attractive for them. I think we don't do enough in our schools today. I'm glad in our rural areas. I think we're further ahead than the inner cities in looking at aptitude testing towards kids that may migrate to a skilled trade or high-tech manufacturing. The beauty is we have high-tech manufacturing in every one of our small rural cities, and we need to create a great pool of work, a great pool and a good workforce for them and to attract them up here. But I think the regulatory burden is some of the biggest pieces in the level of taxation. We'll bring the businesses here, the workforce will keep them here and allow them to grow. And I think that's as important to us in the rural area. Thank you.
Thank you. Responses to the next question will begin with Tim Nelson, and you'll have 2 minutes to respond on this one. What strategies do you recommend for a balanced budget? Try to be specific. For example, if it's to raise taxes, which ones? If you add fees, to what programs? If you want to cut spending, what would you cut? And by how much? That sort of thing. Thank you. And now to Mark Koran.
I think for me, the issues about the balanced budget is, first off, the priority should be that the budget should be done first. Most other activities are ancillary in nature, and most are desires and not needs. But one thing I haven't heard a ton about, and what I think we should focus on at the state level, is that we actually need to cut our spending. But the only way we can do that, or reduce the spending, and definitely slow the growth, is to change the delivery of our government services. My experience has shown that government typically only does less with more over time. That's its only option. And unfortunately for most citizens, they don't understand that, and they don't experience it until government touches them, either voluntarily and involuntarily. I'm a huge private sector fan. I think once we decide side services are delivered, we should deliver them through the private sector. The private sector is the only business model that can operate for productivity and efficiency because there's a corrective model built into that process at the employee level and at the business level. Government doesn't have that built in fundamentally. And for us to not acknowledge it and to work to change that delivery model, we'll be in dire shape, in another 10 years because we cannot keep raising our taxes. You heard in the counties here today, we cannot continue to pass the burdens down and down and raise and have another entity raise the tax on. So I think the keys for us is budget cycle definitely early, should not be the last thing we do in the last minute, in the last hour of the session, and that should be top priority. Let's finish the budget and then work on the other required activities within the state. I'm really about the government efficiency, and that's what I'm going to work hard on to make sure that we hold everyone accountable for our tax dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. For the next question responses, we'll begin with Mark Koran, and then we'll be going in the same direction, so it has to loop back around.
It's a little easier with three of us.
Yes. Okay. And for the timer, we'll go back to 1 minute. Okay. The 2016 general elections ballot will have a constitutional amendment question, and I'm going to read it. This is in quotes. Shall the Minnesota Constitution be amended to remove state lawmakers' power to set their own salaries and instead establish an independent, citizens-only council to prescribe salaries of lawmakers? Are you in favor or against, and why? And before you start, I want the audience to understand that if you leave this blank, you have to make a choice. If you leave a blank, it counts as a no. Okay. So, starting with Mark.
Yeah, I have serious concerns about an independent board based on who appoints the board to affect the salaries. But one of the key things, and it's a huge concern of mine, is how do we change the fee structure, the wage structure, to allow more citizens the opportunity to serve? Unfortunately, today, the structure of pay and the time to serve, the commitment to serve, really eliminates far too many people who would do a great job serving. Today, typically, it's the wealthy, the establishment, and or somebody who's got a great self-supporting business. That's wonderful. But we need an opportunity. We need to create a salary structure that allows more people the opportunity to serve. I'm grateful. I have a very, very forgiving and very accommodating employer. Not everybody has that opportunity, so that's what I would support.
Thank you. So what is your position on light rail for the metro area? Is it good? Is it bad? Should it expand? Should it not? Thank you. Now it goes up to Mark.
As far as light rail goes, I'm against the light rail expansion in the cities. The problem I have with the existing cost infrastructure is that most people, they look at everybody thinks the federal dollars associated with those projects are free. They're not. There are tax dollars. To borrow an additional $1 billion on top of $1 billion quote gift from the federal government is not acceptable to me. I think the challenges the city has is that we don't have the population density to support that type of investment in infrastructure. I'm all for an efficient bus system on the existing road system, expanding the road system, but the planned and organized congestion that the cities have created through restriping their infrastructure that we took 50 years to build and are building trains down through them. Doesn't accommodate our lifestyle and the American culture that we do like the freedom of our cars, and most commerce still comes home in cars, even long-term as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and responses for the next question will begin with Mark Koran. Charitable gaming pays up to 7 times the for-profit corporate tax rate of 9.85% because they are allowed no deductions of any kind and they must pay taxes on their donations. As a candidate for elected state office, do you support tax relief for community-based licensed gaming charities? If not, why not?
I do support tax relief for those gaming entities and true nonprofit organizations who are out there raising those funds. Many of those have moved into very highly profitable charitable or gaming businesses. So I think there's a fine line between those that are truly nonprofit, where they're not paying wages to garner those funds and run those programs, and they're raising funds for the local community. Others that are running more of a commercial enterprise, I would not be in favor of what we're
If elected, what specific actions will you take to address the inequity in public funding faced by the North Branch area public schools and other area schools?
Yeah, I agree that what we need to do is look at the funding. I know there's been significant changes, and it appears that every time we pass a new funding bill, rural areas in Minnesota seem to get shortchanged relative to the per student pupil dollar spent compared to the cities. And we need to fight hard, and we will fight hard to make sure that we have the appropriate funding and to make sure that the funding follows the student and that we provide a great education. And I think along with the funding aspect of it as well, we want to create good, safe schools, and we want to make sure that each one of our kids has a great learning opportunity, and that we empower teachers to be able to take back control of their classrooms. We've all been out door knocking significantly and during this campaign season, and we've talked to a lot of teachers, and they have serious concerns about the impact of the classroom behavior. We have to bring behavior or discipline and control back into the teachers so they can run a proper classroom and provide a great education for all of those that show up and want it.
Self-insured people make up only a small percent of Minnesotans, but pay far more in premiums for their health insurance. What will you do to make sure that all Minnesotans get good health care at a fair cost? Thank you. And to Mark Koran.
I would agree there's a significant difference between having health care coverage or health insurance and access to care. And I think everybody's seen it. It's been the top issue in door knocking. They're concerned about the impacts of the ACA Act and what Minnesota did on top of that cost and added additional money or funding hundreds of millions in cost to manage the program, removing those dollars and the ability to provide care. And MNsure actually is a program that should be focused on just providing the tax credits and the subsidy portion of it. They should not be in the business of selling insurance. The private sector can sell insurance at a far lower cost and a far lower rate and provide better service. We do have challenges with the ACA Act, though, so Minnesota needs to work hard to get our states' rights back and figure out how we can provide a clearer path. Minnesota was well taken care of before the ACA Act was in place. We had MNsure or MSHA, and we had MNcare. And both of those programs provided for the high-risk pools and provided great care. The reality today is, prior to ACA or the MNsure Act in Minnesota, we had 9% of people had coverage. So now we have 8%. Or I'm sorry, 8% had coverage. Now we have 9%. It failed.
The Citizens United decision by the U.S. Supreme Court has allowed billions of dollars to be spent to support political campaigns by corporations, unions, and wealthy individuals. If elected, would you support a resolution to Congress seeking a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United? Why or why not? Thank you. And to Mark.
Yeah, I think on the individual level, I think Minnesota Campaign Finance, they do a great job, and although it may be complicated and how that process works, they do a great job in compliance and discovery. But being on the Republican side, we have our large donors and the outside money. Those things are impactful. Typically, we're on the other side. So I'm not quite sure what the overall impact. I think people should be able to have a say and influence the system. It's just as an undue influence. I would rather see something more impactful to rein in those dollars, actually term limits. When we're out knocking doors, people are tired of established career politicians who don't seem to reflect or understand the behavior and the needs of average citizens. To me, that would have a greater impact on campaign finance and the influence of those dollars, irregardless of the process.
Thank you. Currently, under Minnesota law, when individuals are convicted of a felony, they do not have the right to vote until they are finished with parole or probation. At least 47,000 Minnesotans, disproportionately people of color, are barred from voting. Where do you stand on restoring voting rights for individuals who are on parole or probation, and why?
I'm not for restoration prior to them finishing their sentence, meaning when they're off paper, they can have their voting rights restored, as they are today.
Should the minimum wage be increased, and should sick leave be mandated? Why or why not?
The minimum wage should be driven by the market forces. Anybody who has been in the business and understands that the market forces and the skill sets necessary for a job dictate artificially insert ourselves into that. There's a variety of costs, and it comes through in fewer jobs, fewer hours, and fewer opportunities for our kids that used to have the opportunity to enter the workforce. So we reduce the number of jobs for the kids that we're actually looking for that entry-level job. On top of that, we've legislated kids out of jobs because of the mundane or the legislation that says a 14-year-old can't be buying a deep fryer or some hazardous work environment. Many of us survived and did quite well, going and having those jobs. I think that the forced minimum wage, beyond where it is, if it's not market driven, it just eliminates job and opportunity for our kids entering the workforce. And that's what those jobs are intended for. They weren't intended to raise a family. The other piece, from a sick leave perspective, businesses want to provide those services, and when they can, they do. But it has to be within their budget.
Evidence shows that high-quality, full-day preschool programs help to close the opportunity gap and prepare children for success in school and throughout their lives. In Minnesota, 55% of our state's 3- and 4-year-olds are not enrolled in a preschool program. What steps should the legislature take to ensure every child has access to a high-quality preschool education?
I think it's great, and kids should have opportunity and access to preschool and daycare, but it's a parent's responsibility to seek those out, provide those, or to seek those opportunities and make sure that the kids are prepared. To have a state-mandated or a state-provided funding for pre-K, I don't think it's a responsibility or requirement of us. Having a few very young granddaughters, just the fact that the child to go through a full day of school at 4 years old, they're not prepared for that. We've seen it ourselves and experienced it with our grandchildren. And to see that, even all-day kindergarten was quite the struggle. So I can't imagine the kids being in a position that they can be in that corporate environment of public school systems where they're going to be able to meet the needs of kids that are 3 and 4 years old.
What is your stance on expanding Minnesota's gun violence prevention legislation to require criminal background checks on gun purchases made at gun shows, online, and by individuals? Why?
Well, to expand the... I'm the last one on the list. Well, the gun shows, you already require checks through any license deal with private sales. That hasn't proven to deter criminals from buying their guns. Most of them don't buy their guns through those shows, and certainly online transactions, that's always brought up. Those all have to go through a FFL dealer. So those checks are already in place today. So yet most of those policies of expansion will just put additional burdens on law-abiding citizens, and the criminals don't care and they don't abide by those laws. We have to enforce the laws we have. Tim can probably recite how many laws that somebody breaks when you commit a crime with a gun. We need to focus on those. Thank you.
Thank you. How will you navigate between representing your constituents and providing leadership at the state level, and how will you work with the opposition party? Thank you. And now to Mark Koran for his closing statement.
Thank you. Well, what I'm going to work for is to fight to make sure that we hold our spending in check. We may have different opinions on how we accomplish the same goal, but for me, it's holding the spending in check, holding our government accountable at every level. That's what I've done for my entire life. I've gotten involved. Like I said originally, I'm an activist by nature. I don't believe we can tax our way out of the challenges that we have. We have to think fundamentally different on how we deliver our government services and how we treat our taxpayer dollars. Those are hard-earned dollars. And we've got hard-working families out there doing everything we can, or everything they can to